Hi everyone, welcome back to Shop Talk. So our next speaker is from the new Craftsmen, which I hope many of you will know already is a wonderful brand reinvigorating British craft and design. She is the commercial director there. Her name is Yelena Ford, and she's going to tell us about using retail theatre to animate your brand. Well, Yelena, over to you.
Hello, I'm Yelena. Can everybody hear me? Is that okay? Okay, great. So, pleasure to be here today. Thank you for having me. It's a huge topic, retail theatre, and I don't think whether you're a big business or a small business, everyone's getting it right. It's a really tricky formula. But what I wanted to do is maybe take you through some examples and some insights from our own experience, which hopefully prove useful to you. I thought I'd start by telling you exactly who we are and what we do. So we, the New Craftsmen, we aim to represent makers across the British Isles who are making handmade luxury goods for interiors and for homes. We represent over 120 different makers across the British Isles. And what we're really trying to do is challenge perceptions around craft, really pioneer new, bold applications of material, and really sort of change that very dusty perception of craft that people have today. We also really want to tell authentic stories about British craftsmanship through our own space, which is what we'll talk about today, and through creative projects and collaborations. And ultimately what we want to do is unlock the skills, the creative potential, and the material knowledge of our makers. But how to do that in a really dynamic and enticing way is very tricky. So over the years, we've inhabited different spaces and places, and we've always got that question at the forefront of our mind. What is the most effective way of representing craft today? What does it stand for? I don't know if you know, there's 32,000 craft makers in Britain today. And that's everyone from your master cabinet maker right down to your granny knitting. So that's a huge, huge group of people we're talking about here. We, as I said, we represent about 120 of them. So it's about giving a really sharp and confident edit of their work, elevating them into the luxury sphere and giving them the permission to feel like they own and can be in that space as something credible. We didn't want to go for a white cube gallery style format. That didn't seem right for us. It's kind of like that look, don't touch thing, which doesn't really work. We also didn't want it to be so informal that it felt like your average craft fair, so no authority, no curation. We've never been very good at giving ourselves one single label. So are we a shop, a showroom, a gallery, a studio? We started to actually embrace the flexibility and fluidity of our space, making it work for our own ends and goals, and enabling people to have different experiences within that space. So what we've also done is really use the spaces that we've inhabited to tell the story of our brand. And this has kind of grown and evolved over the years. Our first place was Carlos Place, opposite the Connaught. This was a grand Georgian townhouse opposite the hotel, and had a really sort of domestic feel. You're actually kind of stepping into somebody's home, which is really interesting sort of retail space. The next was Adams Row, which was our second pop-up, which was actually literally around the corner. It was in an old Victorian stable. We had to clear out a lot of hay. And it was very evocative. There were tiled walls, cobbled floors, so a completely different feel again. And then finally, where we have settled now since nearly 3 years ago, is North Row, which is actually an old breeches factory, you know, Victorian men's breeches, which is where we live now. But I think what's been really important that of those three spaces, we've never tried to sterilize it. The space, we enable that space to tell its own story alongside its own in a really complementary way. Over the years, we have kind of instinctively done things, but we have slowly started to define and express a set of values that help to guide our actions as a business, and also the type of experiences that we want to create for our customers. And it's a very useful thing to do. I encourage all of you to do it. So just to go through them, it's one, we embrace the fundamental humanity, that's the key word, of our business. We use imagination to inspire original thought and action, and we strive to have integrity in all that we do, and hope to ensure that we inspire that with all who we work with. So what I thought I would do is go through each of those values and give examples as to how they're animated in our own retail space and beyond. So I hope that's useful for you. The first one is humanity, and I have to say it's probably one of the most important values in our business. We are essentially all about connections and people. We don't just represent our makers, they are actually extensions of our family, of our team. We know them inside out, what makes them tick, what inspires them, what they don't like doing, everything. And it's an essential part of who we are. And it's their stories as makers which are incredible, and we want people to feed off that energy. But how do you translate that in a really authentic way without it being a little bit cliche? Here, for example, we've got Pedro. He's a historical paint and lacquer specialist. And what you see him doing here, he is grinding root stub, which has been underground for 2 years. He has to maintain it at the right temperature underground for 2 years. If it freezes, it's completely ruined. It starts off yellow, and then slowly it becomes blue, and he crushes it, and that's how he gets that vibrant color. So it's those kind of narratives which are absolutely spellbinding. And this is the kind of thing that we really want to communicate. But we don't want to just put makers on display. There's a bit of a sort of in-the-making aquarium style thing going on at the moment, which is quite prolific. A lot of brands are trying to prove and demonstrate their connection to craft. And we're very hyper aware of this. So it's about how to do it in a very real and respectful way. How do we tell their story without reverting to a cliche? So from the beginning, we've explored different ways of doing this, and how to reveal the making process with all the different tools and paraphernalia that comes with it. So here we have, this is actually from the garage, which was our second pop-up, a wall of tools. And these tools are actually an extension of the maker. They're kind of sacred pieces in their life. So a specific brush, a needle, a chisel has one particular job, and they're like very particular about it. And there's something very precious about these items. They're almost as precious as the end final product that enable them to create. And enabling people to have quite an emotional and rare connection with those tools is actually quite special. Over the years, we've developed this further, and we created something called the Maker's Drawers. So this was a huge Victorian chest, and each drawer told the story or trade of a particular maker. So it would contain their inspiration, their sketchbooks, imagery, their process, and the arsenal of skills and knowledge that could be applied to different contexts and objects. And people were fascinated by these drawers. They were able to kind of like step in and just discover that world by themselves. And it became a very key and ownable touch point of our brand experience. We became synonymous with these drawers. In 2015, we brought this to life a little further, and we created something called Atelier. We created almost like a 360 experience of the maker's world. We invited 4 makers to transplant their studio in the front of our showroom for 2 weeks at a time. And during that time, they had to prototype an exclusive piece for the new Craftsmen. A piece of furniture, lighting, tableware. But the important thing is it wasn't dead time. It wasn't fake. We made it as real as possible. So they could select what music or radio station they had on, the smell, so whether it was drying paint or natural dyes, even the kind of biscuits that were in the snack jar, digesters versus custard creams. But it was those kind of little tiny details that brought this to life in a really engaging way. And there's a sense of there's something really quite beguiling about it when customers came in and interacted within this space. I think it's also really important to enable special VIP customers to access almost like an inner world. And I couldn't mention the new Craftsmen without talking about food. Food is actually a really big part of the type of events that we put on. It generates connections with people, and there's a potent synergy between craft and food, actually. We often break bread around a very large table that we have at the back, kind of often squeezing around it. We invite our VIP clients into that space, basically, essentially into our home, a very domestic act that we're having together. And we invite one of the makers to be in conversation with one of the founders or a journalist to tease out different aspects of themselves and their creative process. There's a wonderful sense of generosity that comes with this. People feel very valued when they're able to come into kind of close proximity with the makers and within that sort of inner sanctum. And it really opens people up to new ideas. The second value I'm going to talk about is imagination. So we believe craft is a very powerful storytelling tool. It enables us to change how we view the everyday in a completely different way. So that could be a place, a person, a brand. And this particular project was called Made of Mayfair. We wanted to celebrate our connection to our new home in Mayfair at 34 North Row. So we worked with 7 of our makers to shine a spotlight on the rich artisanal history of the area and encourage the next generation of makers to develop work in response to the local district. Working with a historian, they explored the history, architecture, and traditions that were really prevalent in the area to create a unique body of work. And we had a 4-poster bed that was celebrating the kind of courtesan history of the area, and a hand-woven kind of carving piece inspired by Gringling Gibbons in the chapel. But what was this particular image, what it shows is the staircase to nowhere, which is something that we did during a London Design Festival. So each maker had to inhabit it for one day, and it had to reveal the ideas of their final creation. But what I love about it is the most anti-retail space you can imagine. It was a tiny little slither of a corridor, narrow, hidden, easily missed, but it intrigued people. It was kind of for the curious, those who wanted to discover and look more. It forced them to look and think again and be confronted and surrounded by the maker's world in actually quite a claustrophobic way. But it's also, I think what is quite important about it as an example is that it's not just for that one event that is important. This is an 8-month process. So you're giving people a snapshot in a moment of time of the incredible work that goes on before and after. So how do you give people that sort of window into that process and that world? So it's always thinking it's not just about the event, it's everything that comes before and everything that comes after as well. I think it's also important to be bold within your own space, transforming it, keeping it dynamic. So when a person revisits, it doesn't necessarily look the same twice. This is a shot of our fairy tale forest, which we did for Christmas a couple of years ago. And it completely transformed the space. We did cut out calico kind of banners, which were meant to mimic a white forest. And it was quite a transformative moment within our space. But I think what was also really important is that it wasn't just a live theme brought to life in an offline retail space, but an interconnected set of touch points that created a bigger picture. So, for instance, we invited an author to write a set of 3 fairy tale narrative that featured our products. These were released over social media, email. We had an in-store reading. So if you have a very powerful creative idea at the center, it can beautifully translate into the digital. And you have to see what that interplay and interchange is. And always thinking, you know, is the creative idea, does it give you enough fodder? Are you giving your customers enough to share, to kind of create their own content around? And then I think it's also really important to fire up other people's imagination. About a year and a half ago, we set up something called the Studio, which is at the back of the showroom, and it is a complete material and sample library of the makers we represent for commissioning. So very much an evolution of the drawers that I was talking about, but much more robust, much more complete. And this is largely used with our B2B clients, so interior designers, architects, brand partners, and it's basically their creator playpen. They can play in it, understand the creative possibilities of working with these makers. Also, critically, it makes the abstract real quite quickly, which is very important if you're talking about doing bespoke orders and commissions. And then finally, I wanted to briefly talk about Maker's House, because it was also about firing up people's imagination of a brand that they thought they had really kind of put in their box and they completely understood. But we wanted to enable people to see it in a completely different light. So for Burberry, it was the first time they had a Buy Now collection. They wanted to showcase their enduring commitment to craftsmanship. So together we created a temporary show space, highlighting Britain's best craft makers through daily programming, but in a really meaningful and relevant way. So we were able to welcome over 30,000 visitors to this space and enable people to really review and reconsider the Burberry brand. And it was about leveraging our connection to craft and making to inject that authenticity into the Burberry brand. The next stage of that collaboration was the refurbishment of Thomas's Cafe, which is connected to Burberry's Regent Street store. And I put it actually as an example of integrity rather than imagination, because I think when you do begin to work with external partners and you begin to see yourself in spaces that you don't have complete control of, integrity becomes essential. So Thomas's was about curating a space that represents the permanent manifestation of this brand partnership. So whatever we were going to do there, it was going to last. It wasn't temporary. It wouldn't just shut down within 3 to 4 weeks. And it was actually the first time we'd really thought about what does a permanent new craftsman space look like beyond 34 North Row, and what is the lasting impression that we wanted to make. And this also had to be obviously pitted against the commercial realities that the space had to deliver against, so sales, covers, service, and blending hospitality and retail effectively. And as much as possible, we wanted to use our makers, our things within the space to kind of create it, whether that be furniture, painting, the finishes, all of those things. We were really able to enliven and enrich quite a corporate space to begin with. And it really re-energized the hospitality staff within it. They finally had something to talk about with customers, narratives to pass on, really layering that kind of materiality and storytelling within the space. And it was an amazing project to do that with Burberry and create that on a really permanent basis. I think integrity is also critical for when you enter into a new market geographically. So last year in December, we wanted to have a presence in Miami during Art Basel Design Miami. As ever, we wanted to do something a bit different. So we were a new entrant, a complete nobody. Nobody knew us. But how could we make noise in quite a loud and boisterous market? Miami is. So how could we do that but kind of remain true to ourselves? So we ended up taking over a penthouse suite at the One Hotel and stylized the space with beautiful decorative accessories and textiles that showcase the innovation, but also kind of the joyfulness of British craft. I think people think we're quite serious. And in each room of the penthouse, you could discover something new. So customers were actually kind of almost going on a treasure hunt around this penthouse to discover the new things. And what was really quite nice is that it really still maintained that domestic feel, which is really at the heart of our brand. We were ultimately kind of showcasing how someone could live with these beautiful objects in a really practical, everyday way, from the living room, the bedside table, the kitchen. So there was almost kind of a luxury, but also a mundanity to kind of what we were doing there, which was really interesting and very powerful. And then the final example I wanted to talk to you about was our recent installation at Selfridges, which is still ongoing. It closes at the 9th of June. And speaking about home, basically Selfridges invited us to create an installation which celebrated what home means to us today. And it's kind of a privilege to be the one to consider and define that with them as a brand. And what you are invited to do is actually journey through the space and come into contact with 4 different rituals. The first is rest. The second is gather. Then there is play, and there is cleanse. But the foundational premise is all about how home is simply where we can be. We can be completely ourselves, and therefore our most creative and instinctive selves. And the most critical area of that space was play. And every 2 weeks, a new maker comes into that space and creates their own world, but enables other people to kind of participate within that world. But what I love about it is that it's such an honest communication of who they are, what they do, without any buffering. There's no funfair, there's no bells and whistles. There's a core and purity maintained. And, you know, we did that without compromise. I think it's so easy to kind of fall into the step of entertainment. You've got to entertain, but actually, if you stay kind of true and steady, you still can create an experience that people find engaging without lots of noise. So it's a really important thing to consider. That's it from me. If you've got any questions whatsoever, let me know, and I'm here for like another 10 minutes, I think, to answer questions.